think we should make a start. I'm Rowie Sweet. I'm from the University of Leicester. I'm one of the vice presidents of the Society of Antiquaries, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Society today for this public lecture. It's a great pleasure to see so many people here on a beautiful spring day, and thank you very much for coming. As not everybody here is a fellow of the Society, I thought it might be useful just to give you a little bit of information about the Society and who we are. We were actually founded over 300 years ago in 1707. A group of friends who were meeting at a pub, the Bear Tavern, decided to form a society for the purpose of investigating and debating the material remains of the past in Britain. In 1751, they were awarded a royal charter by George II for the encouragement, advancement, and furtherance of a study and knowledge of the antiquities and history of this and other countries. By 1780, they'd moved out of the pub and were given rooms in Somerset House, along with the Royal Society. And this allowed the Society of Antiquaries to really begin to establish its collection of books and material objects, its library and its museum, which we continue to hold, and to hold regular meetings for fellows to discuss and debate their research into the material past. In 1784, we moved into these premises in Burlington House, specially built for the learned societies. And here we contribute to focus on our fellowship, conservation, research, and the dissemination of our work. We remain today focused on these core objectives, and as a registered charity, we're committed to sharing our collections and our work with the public through lectures such as this, public tours, exhibitions, scholarly research seminars, and a program of publications. And last year, we launched our affiliate membership scheme. So you can now join us in understanding the human past today, tomorrow, and in the future. A little bit of housekeeping. There's going to be a Q&A session at the end of the talk. And can I just emphasize, this will be Q&A up to the end of the 20th century. We're not discussing what's happening on Saturday in this lecture. So we will be taking questions also from Zoom and YouTube. So if anyone wants to ask a question online, please just chat it into the chat function, and we can incorporate these at the end of the lecture. So today's lecture, Heralding the Coronation, Heralds and Heraldry at Coronations from the Middle Ages to the 20th century, is being given by Adrian Isles, FSA. He's an honorary research associate of the University of Bristol, attached to the Centre for Medieval Studies, a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries, and a fellow of the Heraldry Society. He's written extensively on royal heraldry and has been working on it since the 1990s, and particularly on the coronation in the public records at the TNA. On Friday, he'll be taking part in the Antiquaries Evening Coronation celebrations, which you've probably seen the publicity for, and is currently working on a volume for the Harleian Society on the heralds at the coronation. So Adrian, can I invite you to give the lecture?
Thank you very much, Rosemary, and good afternoon, and welcome to those listening online. And I hope those present will be able to perhaps nip upstairs, see one or two of the books in the library, which are going to be on exhibit on Friday evening. I want to say, before I begin, a very big special thank you to a number of institutions that have allowed me to research their archives and reproduce some images this afternoon. And they are, in particular, the College of Arms, the Old Marshall, the Royal Archives, and the Royal Collections. So let's start at the end. In his memorable live TV narration of the late Queen's coronation in 1953, BBC commentator Richard Dimbleby excitedly announced the arrival of Her Majesty's procession within Westminster Abbey, and I quote, but sadly not in Dimbleby's sonorous tones. The quote is, "And through the screen of the Abbey, Come our first glimpse of the heralds in their splendor. Suddenly, as though we had gone back 400–500 years. Well, here come Fitzalan Pursuivant Extraordinary, Portcullis Pursuivant of Arms, Rouge Dragon Pursuivant of Arms, Kintyre Pursuivant of Arms, Unicorn Pursuivant of Arms, Harrig Pursuivant of Arms. Thimbleby brilliantly caught the mood of the nation on that wet June day, and was right to suggest that the heralds, in their resplendent tabards, both English and Scottish versions, instantly took us back some half a millennium. They have, after all, been a quintessential part of coronations in this country since at least 1399. Whilst the presence of heraldry, those hereditary shield emblems later controlled by the royal heralds, at this ancient ceremony almost certainly reaches back even further. There are no specific references to the use of heraldry at coronations in England or inaugurations in Scotland until the 15th century, though armorial banners and surcoats must have featured at these great rituals of power well before that date, possibly as early as the coronation of Richard I in 1189. Our first reliable mention of heralds during a coronation takes place not in the Abbey, but at the Tower of London, and not at the coronation itself, but shortly before it. Payment was made to several English and foreign heralds, including Lion King of Arms, the chief Scottish herald, for their part in the ritual dubbing of 46 knights at the Tower on the day before Henry IV's coronation in October 1399. This innovation, involving a nightly vigil beforehand, ritual purification by bathing, investiture, and procession through London of new Knights of the Bath, as they came to be called, was a regular feature of coronations for centuries to come, involving several heralds on each occasion. Another feature in the 1399 coronation, in which the heralds played an important role, and which again was repeated for several centuries, was their attendance at the post-coronation banquet in nearby Westminster Hall. In 1399, Sir Thomas Dimmock, the King's champion, entered the hall on horseback, flanked by two knights, also on horseback. One held his shield, which presumably bore either the King's arms or the Dimmock, two crowned lions passant, as seen here on a much later occasion. The champion then handed a scroll to the herald, who read out his challenge, that's the champion's challenge, in English and French at the four corners of the Great Hall, that if there was any person who wished to say that his liege, the Lord King, was not the lawful king, or had not been lawfully crowned, the King's champion was ready there in person to prove him wrong in armed combat. No one took up the challenge either then or at any coronation since. So I kind of imagine it was rather like when you're in church and they read out the marriage banns, and you're secretly hoping that someone is going to object, but only to find out what's going to happen next on such an occasion. And incidentally, I should be using the term herald to refer to all three ranks of officers of arms. The most senior are the Kings of Arms, who wear their crowns at coronations, the heralds, and then the most junior rank, the pursuivants. I should also explain that Scotland has a separate heraldic authority to that of England, namely the Court of the Lord Lion, and that from the, well, I suppose, mid-16th century to the 20th century, Ireland had its own independent office of arms. Payment in red scarlet was made to 7 heralds and to Guyon, King of Arms, for attending the coronation of Henry V in April 1413. Heralds, including the first Garter King of Arms, seen here, were rewarded for their presence at his wife's separate coronation in 1421. And you can see here the copy of that payment. Just move this, you can just see Garter there, Clarenceau, Ireland, Exeter, Nottingham, Leopard Herald, Richmond Heralds, and then their payment on the just across there. For the same occasion, 6 new tabards, 26 trumpet banners, and 12 flags were produced for this event. If you think about it, that's an awful lot of lions and the lilies to be stamped in these various trumpet banners and tabards, etc. And I should just explain that the fleur-de-lis of France had been courted with the 3 lions of England since Edward III's claim to the French throne in 1340. In November 1429, a few days before his 8th birthday, Henry VI was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, and this was followed by a lavish banquet in Westminster Hall. At that banquet, the Kings of Arms stood upon a scaffold in their tabards, wearing their crowns. So this is the banquet that takes place after the coronation in the Abbey. It takes place in Westminster Hall. Well, at this banquet, the first course consisted of a subtlety or food sculpture, featuring a miniature tableau consisting of Edward the Confessor and St. Louis of France, escorting the young King Henry, all 3 dressed in their coats of arms. So in the case of the pre-heraldic Edward the Confessor, his arms had been attributed to him long after his death. And these arms still form part of the coat of arms of Westminster Abbey, and so therefore must have featured at many a coronation since. Also at Henry VI's post-coronation banquet were custards and subtleties molded into the shape of lions and lilies, and even an heraldic antelope, because the antelope was a favorite heraldic device of his father, Henry V, and one destined to enter the elite menagerie of royal beasts. Under the Treaty of Troyes, Henry VI of England also succeeded, in due course, to the throne of France. On the 2nd of December, 1431, he made a solemn entry into Paris, where he was met at the gate of Saint-Denis by a huge shield bearing the arms of the capital, complete with ship and a live crew representing bishop, university, and city. Once inside the capital, the young king was presented with a shield of France and a shield of England before being confronted by a live stag, that's a French royal beast, caparisoned with the arms of France and England. On the 16th of December, he was crowned King of France in Notre Dame. The English heralds having very properly assisted with the order of precedence for those English nobles present. During the lavish meal afterwards, a pastry consisting of a fleur-de-lis surmounted by a golden crown and supported by 2 angels was served before the king, who I imagine by this stage, after the 2 coronations, was very probably suffering from heraldic indigestion, but there we go. By the mid-15th century, the royal heralds were generally regarded, or at least considered themselves, to be the secular high priests of chivalry. Their experience of organizing ceremonial events and their knowledge of precedents, protocol, and heraldry ensured their close involvement in the crowning of a new king. The heraldry employed on these occasions, and which was becoming increasingly controlled by the heralds, must have sent out strong messages of legitimate succession, same royal arms being quietly adopted, unchanged if possible, by the new monarch. Both the heralds and heraldry present also added to the splendor of these rituals of power. Both helped elicit maximum public awe and loyalty to the new sovereign. For his coronation in 1483, a new Yorkist king, Richard III, ordered 4 standards carrying his personal badge, a white boar, 2 others with white lions, another Yorkist badge, 740 pencils stamped with his boar, and 13,000 cognizances of fustian painted with the same badge. More banners bore the arms of St. George, the royal arms, and the arms of St. Edward. Shortly before the big day, Richard paid Guard King of Arms and other heralds the princely sum of £100, that's an awful lot there, as their largesse for this event. Richard was particularly keen on heraldry and realized the political value in establishing his new authority on the populace by using heraldry. And in 1484, he was to incorporate the College of Arms in London. But his reign was not to last, and in 1485, a new king and a new dynasty sat on the English throne. During the creation at the Tower of London of new Knights of the Bath on the eve of the coronation, Richard's successor, Henry Tudor, created a new pursuivant, Rouge Dragon, in celebration of his British ancestry and descent from ancient Welsh princes. Red velvet for dragons and red roses, a Lancastrian badge, was ordered for a horse trapper for the coronation. During the Tudor period, a red dragon dreadful formed an heraldic supporter to the royal arms and would have featured at all the forthcoming Tudor coronations, and it too became a permanent heraldic royal beast. 12 tabards, new tabards for heralds, horse trappings bearing the arms of the king, St. Edward, St. Edmund, and falcons, another royal beast, were also purchased. At the banquet afterwards, King's champion once again rode into Westminster Hall, his horse caparisoned with the attributed arms of Cadwallader, ancient king of Gwynedd, and these were probably a gold cross patty on a blue field. So few viewing the procession or attending the coronation or banquet afterwards would have missed the significance of such powerful pictorial symbolism. The role of the herald owes much to the tournament, where they first learned to identify the combatants by their coats of arms and thus be able to announce their entrance to the lists and proclaim the victor. Heralds were therefore almost certainly involved in the 2 to 3 day tournaments that, from the 14th century, were an established feature at coronations. The tilt yard at the Palace of Westminster, following the coronation of Henry VIII and his wife, Catherine of Aragon, in 1509, was decorated with a fountain over which a castle stood, decorated with roses for Henry VIII and pomegranates for the new queen. The walls of the castle were coloured white and green, the Tudor livery colours. More new heralds' tabards were produced for the king's marriage in 1533 to Anne Boleyn and for her subsequent coronation. The tabards were 3 coats in velvet for the kings of arms, 7 in damask for the heralds, and 9 in sosnet for the pursuivants. Afterwards, the heralds were rewarded with livery of cloth and a largesse, namely £50 for the, and I quote, most honourable and joyous marriage, and £50 for the young queen's coronation. Well, it was then realised they had not actually been present for the wedding, and they had to hand back the £50. So they nearly got away with it on that occasion, but they were caught out. Before her coronation, Anne was escorted from Greenwich to the Tower by a fleet of barges, flying banners bearing the arms of the city livery companies. One commentator says this was a most marvellous sight. You can read his commentary in the Letters and Papers of Henry VIII, which you see before you. The main gate into Westminster Hall was elaborately painted with lions, fleur-de-lis, roses, and, favourite Tudor device, the Beaufort portcullis, still today associated with the Palace of Westminster. At the coronation banquet of Mary Tudor, Garter and the other heralds, in a loud voice, proclaimed the Queen's style in Latin, French, and English, followed by 3 cries of largesse. It seems that the heralds, certainly in those days, were always keen to be financially rewarded on these occasions. They were now the recognized creators and custodians of the official record of such events. For example, this pen and ink depiction, supposedly of the procession of Mary's sister and successor, Elizabeth I, the day before her coronation, is in a book begun by Thomas Hawley, Clarence King of Arms, and continued under Elizabeth, and has been at the College of Arms since at least 1618. In March 1603, the English throne passed to Elizabeth's nearest royal relative, James VI of Scotland. He had already been crowned ruler of his northern kingdom in 1567 at the parish church of Stirling, in a ceremony attended by Lion King of Arms and his brother heralds and pursuivants, for which they were paid £29 expenses. In advance of his London coronation as James I of England, the heralds, according to the Venetian ambassador, examined all the various precedents, even, and I'm quoting, even the most remote ones. This was, after all, the first dual crowning of a king and queen consort for nearly a century. The ambassador also noticed that at the coronation, the heralds were dressed in open tabards, emblazoned with the new courtly arms of all four kingdoms of James's new imperium, Great Britain, namely the English lions, the French lilies, lion rampant of Scotland, and the harp of Ireland. Always worth reading what ambassadors have to say on these occasions, because they're very lynx-eyed, they want to observe everything, and they're able to send back details to their people, whether it be in Venice or wherever, which possibly others wouldn't want to say. They can say some quite intimate things. On fuller versions of the royal arms, the Scots unicorn had replaced the Welsh dragon as one of the heraldic supporters. The heralds were determined to record in every detail and were given their own observation box in the Abbey. They too reflected James's Greater Britain, with Lion King of Arms of Scotland walking between Clarenceux King of Arms of England and Ulster King of Arms from Ireland. In 1625, James's son, Charles I, was crowned King of England, France, and Ireland at Westminster. And in 1633, he was crowned King of Scotland. Printed ceremonial for his Scots coronation notes that in the procession to the church, Lion King of Arms, his crown upon his head and flanked by two other heralds, carries the vessel containing the sacred oil for this second anointing. When, in the spring of 1660, Charles II returned from exile following the civil wars and interregnum, he was determined his coronation would be a magnificent affair, closely following ancient precedent. He ordered Sir Edward Walker, Guard King of Arms, to examine the records of past coronations and devise an up-to-date form and order for his own. Afterwards, both Walker and his colleague, Elias Ashmole, Windsor Herald, produced full and exact accounts of the day. And this is one of the latter's drafts before its anonymous publication in the second edition of John Ogilvy's Entertainment of Charles II. And a copy of that is upstairs, in the Antiquaries Library upstairs. The coronation of Charles II's brother, James II of England and 7th of Scotland in 1685, Francis Sandford, Lancaster Herald, was commissioned by the king to produce a detailed report of the coronation. The result was a magnificent and lavishly illustrated book. In this crowning scene, you can just see the heralds in small boxes. Yep, there they are. Just here, you can see the little boxes there and there. You can just see the heralds in small boxes around the base of the pillars of the central tower. Here they could take careful note of what was going on. And in this place, you can see the champion riding into Westminster Hall in the banquet after the coronation, preceded by the Dimmock Arms and herald about to proclaim the challenge. So there you've got the Dimmock Arms. There's the herald about to read out the challenge. Here's the champion, flanked by two knights, flanked by two others. Possibly, I'm looking to the audience here for inspiration, the Earl Marshal and Constable, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But you can see the herald here. He's about to proclaim the champion's challenge. On the floor, you can see the gauntlet has been thrown down. And this is Westminster Hall. Up here, you can see the royal arms again repeated on the trumpet banners. And here, a rather manic drummer giving it welly with the drums. So presumably quite a loud noise when this challenge was proclaimed. There was no creation of new Knights of the Bath before James's coronation, nor was there to be a separate coronation in Scotland. For in just over 3 years' time, the Catholic King James had been exiled in the Glorious Revolution. ensued. On the 1st of August, 1714, Queen Anne, the last Stuart, died. Her successor, the Protestant German Georg Ludwig, landed in Britain on the 18th September and on the 20th of October was crowned at Westminster Abbey as King George I, King of Great Britain. Say King of Great Britain because the Union of Scotland had already occurred with the Union of Scotland in 1707. King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland. It appears that tabards incorporating a new fourth quarter for Hanover were not yet ready. This one does. The revised royal arms did not appear on George's Great Seal until the following April, and accounts for the King's Great Wardrobe, now in the Royal Archives, include a painting of a new tabard seen here, suggest that it was sometime in 1717 that the heralds finally took possession of their coats. Garter was not present at the coronation, and it was the last time that Lion wore his distinct version of crown as a Scottish King of Arms. The next king, George II, was to pass a warrant that Lion should wear the same crown design as the English Kings of Arms. And you can see here in this painting in the fourth quarter, the galloping white horse of Hanover, which became one of the Queen's beasts, or King's beasts in this case. But whereas William Hawkins, Ulster Herald, had proclaimed George II's coronation as a triumph, quote, conducted with such exactness and good order, George II's coronation, that's the one Handel, of course, Handel's Zadok the Priest, etc. Despite this, the coronation of George III in 1760 proved something of a shambles. The writer Horace Walpole and his friend, the poet Thomas Gray, were both sharply critical of the heralds on this occasion. Whether they deserve this or not, I cannot say. That needs further research. Heralds were certainly much in evidence for the next coronation, that of George IV, which took place in July 1821. The new king was eager to outdo the magnificent coronation of the French Emperor, Napoleon, and succeeded in staging an extravagant and expensive spectacle, if anything a bit too spectacular. Heralds from England, Scotland, and Ireland helped marshal proceedings and keep to order, at least one herald coming in for some physical abuse from an irate peer. Their tabards now lacked the French fleur-de-lis claimed to France, having been dropped in 1801, and boasted at their centre a crown in escutcheon of Hanover, for it was now a kingdom. The procession from Westminster Hall to the Abbey was led by the King's herbswoman with her maids, directly followed by a messenger of the College of Arms in scarlet cloak with the College Arms embroidered on the left shoulder. It was the first time standards of the quarterings of the Royal Arms, that's England, Scotland, and Ireland, the Union flag, and the Royal Standard had been carried in a coronation procession, and also borne aloft was the standard of Hanover. You can just see in this picture Scotland and Ireland standards there, which will be carried, I believe, on Saturday. As if the coronation ceremony was not sufficiently grand enough, the banquet afterwards was especially extravagant, and it proved to be the last. Thus, it was the final roll call for a herald to read out aloud the challenge on behalf of the King's champion. And yet, despite the expense, overweight and befeathered sovereign, fancy dress, and post-banquet plunder, food and cutlery, the day did help revive popular loyalty for the monarchy. A magnificent illustrated report of the proceedings was produced by Sir George Naylor, Garter. A copy bearing his seal for authenticity can be seen in the Antiquaries exhibition. The next king, William IV, was determined to stage a much less grand affair and abolished both the pre-coronation ceremonial and the post-coronation banquet, both held in Westminster Hall and both heavily involving the heralds. Nevertheless, he found money to buy the heralds' new tabards, and they were still heavily involved in the cut-down procession, coronation. Their practical experience of ceremonial, expert knowledge of precedents and of the peerage, and of their unique collection of coronation records, doubtless proving yet again invaluable. But the new tabards did not last long, for in 1837, King William's niece, the 18-year-old Victoria, succeeded to the throne of Great Britain and Ireland, but not to the throne of Hanover, which barred females from inheriting the kingdom. Hanoverian arms were therefore dropped from the royal achievement, and the heralds' tabards changed to simply England quartering the Lion Rampant of Scotland and the Irish harp. Tabards of the English heralds have remained the same design at every coronation since. And you can just see there on your left, Guard King of Arms, who was wearing his new tabard. The coronation of Victoria's son, the elderly Edward VIII in 1901, was to become the template of all that followed in the same century. Britain was by now a truly imperial power, its colonies stretching across the globe, and the new king, that is Edward VII, was keen for his coronation to reflect this situation. 50,000 colonial troops took part in the street procession. That's an awful lot of troops, you think about it. I'm not sure how many are going to be involved this coming Saturday, but nothing like that figure. The heraldic standards of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and India were all carried in the Abbey procession. Edward was unfortunately not so keen on the heralds organising the event and wished for Lord Esher to stage manage the coronation. Esher had little time for the office of arms, but out of regard for the Duke of Norfolk, who, as hereditary Earl Marshal, had responsibility for the College of Arms on major state occasions, but out of respect for the Duke of Norfolk, he declined the king's invitation. Heraldry once again decorated the stage, notably 3 superbly embroidered shields, Scotland, England, and Ireland, set above the high altar of the Abbey. Perhaps not so much shields there, but banners. Sadly, it was the last time a coronation was recorded in grand manner by a herald. This time the role fell to H. Farnham Burke, Somerset Herald. His text contains many useful references to the heralds, including the petitions to the Court of Claims of Lord Lyon and Rothesay Herald that the Scots heralds and pursuivants attend the coronation, and a similar claim from Ulster King of Arms and Athlone pursuivant, so that is the Irish heralds. Farnham Burke's text is accompanied by equally splendid illustrations by Bynum Shaw. They include this one of Henry Weldon as Deputy Garter, summoning knights of the Garter called the canopy for the king's anointing. And I believe this book will be on display on Friday evening here at the Antiquaries Rituals of Power exhibition. At the other end of the publication market, Punch magazine, based in Bouverie Street, London, reported that the king had elevated Mr. Punch to Bouverie King of Arms to institute an overflow ceremony for the more, I quote, complete entertainment of His Majesty's visitors and loyal lieges. His faithful dog, Toby, FSA, was created Chat Noir, pursuivant, especially for the purpose. So you can see the two there. I didn't realize that dogs, or is it cats, could become fellows of the society, but there it is. There's Toby, FSA. Less than a decade later, and there was another coronation. It was rather like London buses. You wait for one, and then 2 come along in quick succession. The Earl Marshal and his heralds, especially Garter, were now very much in control of proceedings, especially in matters of ceremonial and precedence. Garter, for example, in 1911, for the coronation of George V, was asked what the young Prince of Wales should wear, and whether a prince of the royal blood, not being a peer of the realm, could do homage. Perhaps before I move away from that slide, you can see along the bottom imperial devices, let's call them, New Zealand, Canada, United Kingdom. I wish I hadn't said this now, because I've now got to think what the next one is. That's, I think, there's going to be South Africa and India, as well as Australia along the bottom. And also Queen Mary's coat of arms there rather nicely in the top right. In 1937, the College of Arms was faced with some issues. There was kind of similar sensitive issues for the coronation of George VI. For instance, Garter was told that the King and Queen wanted a certain lady to be one of the Queen's train bearers. But alas, she was not, as precedents dictated, the daughter of a peer or above. A splendid British compromise was reached, whereby for the coronation day only, she was allowed to enjoy the rank and style of the daughter of a marquess. So presumably at 12 o'clock, she kind of changes back Cinderella-like into being a lady. George VI's coronation was probably the first time for many years that a Scots herald, at a London coronation, had worn a tabard emblazoned with the royal arms of the United Kingdom as used in Scotland. The lion rampant of Scotland taking precedence in the first and fourth quarters, as you can see here. As the finest heraldic scholar of his day, Oswald Barron was appointed Maltravers Herald of Arms Extraordinary to assist with the coronation and in tribute to his outstanding contribution to heraldry and genealogy. A letter from the president of the Society of Antiquaries, Sir Frederick Kenyon, now amongst the Earl Marshal's papers at Arundel Castle, enthusiastically endorses his nomination for the post. Barron had been a fellow of the Antiquaries for many decades. George VI died in February 1952, and on the 6th of June, Sir George Bellew, Garter, proclaimed the date of the coronation of the new Queen, Elizabeth II. This allowed a year for the Earl Marshal and his heralds, close cooperation with the Ministry of Works, to organize the great event. And so we are back where we started with this talk. Men such as the young John Brooke Little, founder of the Heraldry Society, and Alexander Colin Cole, later Guard King of Arms, were drafted in to help the Earl Marshal tackle such concerns as, was it the Lord Lion King of Arms or simply Lion King of Arms? And was it Lord High Constable of Scotland or just High Constable of Scotland? These things mattered. For 20th century coronations, if not well before, College had advised on the form and order of service, what robes should be worn, and who should carry what regalia and so on, or carry what flags and at what point during the coronation. On the day itself, each officer of arms was given a specific role, usually looking after a numbered section of the procession within the abbey and ensuring that peers and guests were seated in the right places and at the right time. All this was done with military precision. And you can see there a book in the College of Arms showing where people had to be, where they were to walk to, and so on. In 1953, Garter Bellew went to great lengths to ensure nothing was overlooked or not carried out in accordance with precedents or tradition. For example, small things like he ensured a full-length mirror was provided for the Queen behind the scene. And he refused the Glovers Company, who had paid for the ceremonial glove, to have their coat of arms embroidered upon it, featuring instead the new royal cipher. But he did, however, allow the Glovers Company to have their arms on the box. The Scriveners Company fared better, since they managed to sneak their heraldic device onto the pen with which the late Queen signed the coronation oath. You can see the eagle there, subtly placed upon the pen. Amongst the flags carried in the Abbey procession in 1953 were those of the recently independent dominions of Pakistan and Ceylon. India was now a fully independent republic and chose not to be represented with its flag being carried. Outside the Abbey, heraldry spilled out onto the streets of Britain and the rest of the Commonwealth in a myriad of street parties, souvenirs, mugs, tumblers, plates, posters, guides, and publications. And I particularly like this very lively rendition of the Royal Arms on a British Rail poster. One individual who, like Baron in 1937, was called upon for their heraldic or ceremonial expertise was the antiquarian Hugh Stanford London, FSA. He meticulously researched the specially commissioned 6-foot-high plaster and clay statues of the 10 Queen's beasts, heraldic figures celebrating the new monarch's ancestry, and to my mind, the heraldic highlight of the day. Sentinel-like, they graced the modernistic temporary annex at the entrance of the Abbey. And in tribute to his heraldic scholarship and his contribution to the coronation, London, that's Hugh Stanford London, was created Norfolk Herald Extraordinary, and he took part in the ceremony. Over the centuries, the heralds, in their role as organizers of this great ritual of power, have managed to assemble a unique collection of detailed records, much of it based on their own research, observations. Time and again, this knowledge has proved invaluable to successive monarchs, keen to promote the ancientness and magnificence of the most important event of their reigns. The herald's role has not always been easy, having to reconcile tradition and precedence with change and innovation. At the same time, they've had to bear in mind the personal preferences of the new monarch, as well as public and political pressures. The heraldry they have so carefully supervised on these occasions has reflected both the continuity of the royal lines of succession, as well as the various changes in dynasty. It has provided not only colourful display, but also assisted new monarchs stamp their own identity and power on peerage and populace alike. But let's not forget that, despite the presence of the heralds in their splendour, to quote David Dimbleby again, and all the pomp and pageantry afforded by their trade heraldry, neither heralds nor heraldry should be allowed to obscure the true meaning of this sacred ritual of power, namely the setting apart of the monarch to serve God and his or her people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for that beautifully illustrated talk and absolutely fascinating tour through the coronations from the 14th century onwards. We are able to take some questions, and as I said before, people who are watching online are welcome to place the questions in the chat. But in the first instance, whilst Annabelle's looking at what's in the chat, has anybody here in the room got any questions for Adrian? We'll pass the microphone. So I'm going to have to keep doing this in my glasses. I've got to that terrible age where
I was just wondering how the tabards were actually made. Are they painted? Because they couldn't have been embroidered in the short time between the death of one monarch and the coronation of another, could they?
That's a very good point, very good question. And indeed, some coronations were very quick after the accession for obvious reasons, because as soon as you were became the anointed king, it became very difficult to displace you, so on. And so we do find that tabards were created very quickly and very cheaply. And I think this must be, and I now need to have somebody from the V&A here, but they were often described as being stamped with the arms. I think the Latin, any Latinists amongst us, I'm looking at Andrea, Valpe, something like that. But if you have lines being stamped, bang, 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 and then the fleur-de-lis, so on, same sizes for the trumpet banners as well as for the tabards, these can be produced very quickly and very cheaply. But you might know more about this than I do, but I believe that there is in the V&A some examples of things like tabards being stamped, so being produced quite quickly and cheaply. I don't know whether that answers your question, but I would, I have looked at this, but I really need somebody who knows about embroidery, etc. But material was stamped in the late Middle Ages, 15th century, and yes, it was produced within days and very cheaply because we have the payments for the people who produce them as well. And we're talking pennies, so it's not very much at all. But it was important to get new tabards. No point in using the old tabards. They represented the old king. And also they were thrown into the grave the old king or queen. So you didn't have them anymore.
But following on from that, what do the heralds wear at the accession proclamation from St. James's and from the Royal Exchange? Because that's obviously almost immediately after the death of a previous monarch.
Well, I know there's some heralds here present who are actually at that proclamation, actually were there. As far as I know, these are the tabards which they've been using in the past. I think it was Henry VII who, at the funeral of his funeral or the funeral of the king he was beforehand, what he had was they took their tabards off at the funeral, and instead of throwing them into the grave, they then put them on railings behind, and then they proclaimed the new, and then they put the same ones back on. This saved obviously a lot of money. So as far as I know, and I can be corrected here, it's the tabards which they've worn on previous occasions. It would be extremely expensive, and you wouldn't have the time to produce new tabards today.
The time would be the problem.
Well, yes, it's really important to pronounce yourself to be new king or queen.
What is the blue character on the bottom left-hand side of the invitation currently on screen?
Oh, question on the 21st century. This is all current affairs and journalism for me. The one you're talking about, this character here, it's a boar, as in the shand coat of arms of what we now call of the Queen Consort here, Queen Camilla on Saturday. So that it's a boar, and it's from the arms of the Shand family, which is Queen Camilla's family.
I've got two questions. One very easy. What was Walpole so rude about? I mean, he's always rude about everything, but you said he was very rude about the heralds, which is third coronation.
I think he just is generally very critical. And I think he says something they don't know what they're doing, something like this. He was a keen observer of life, as you know. Mm. I'm not sure if he managed to actually get into the abbey, which is a bit unfair, a bit unkind. Yeah. His friend, Thomas Gray, who writes about the pomp of heraldry, I think it is equally critical on this. And there have been criticisms of the heralds throughout just about many coronations. But you can read about it in the correspondence of Walpole. That's those 7 volumes, yes. And I did look it up.
Look it up.
Yes.
And
which are online, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And my bigger question, you probably can't answer in the scope of this, but this talk, but thinking about the changing role of heralds from having a very explicit function in the medieval period to the 20th century, are they just elaborate party planners? So what's I'm putting it too easy, but what's changing in the nature of that? Could you tell us a bit more about how the office of a herald is actually evolving over this period? Because obviously it grows out of war and the cult of chivalry and the royal pageantry. And how does the actual office of a herald outside coronations change during this longue durée that you've been describing?
So we're talking basically the end of the 12th century to the year 2000 in the space of a few minutes now.
Well, the military side is obvious. I mean, the medieval is more obvious,
but later on.
But later on, from the
medieval, one can say that by the end of the Middle Ages, they were very much in control or being asked to control the organization and marshalling of various ceremonies. They were now royal heralds, and not only did their presence add a certain splendor in their tabards and so on, but you needed someone to organize who was going first. In precedence, really important. Late Middle Ages, people would go to court about this. Who should come first, who should come second, and so on. And then there's just the practical. You need somebody, perhaps with a wand, etc., to just make sure everybody's keeping up in order, that nobody kind of sneaks into processions. I think in 17, there's instructions in either, perhaps it's George III's coronation, where they're under heavy instructions to make sure that nobody sneaks into the procession. And they're kind of the bouncers on this. But you're right, there all does evolved because by the end of the Middle Ages, they have become very much experts in not only chivalry and so on, precedents, but also in heraldry. So they're keeping the records. They are beginning to share these records, their knowledge, it's shared expertise. They become very much more professionalized at the end of the Middle Ages. And their role is being seen very much in terms of the granting of arms, the control of arms, the recording of arms, so on, and being called upon at certain great events. That might be the birth of one of the king's children or queen's children, for example. So being used for ceremonial purposes, which kind of grows out of their very origins when it was their duty to ensure the tournaments ran according to the right people were at the right time and could be recognized by their heraldry. Has that answered your question? Because it was a very big question.
It's a very big question, yes. And I think one could write, well, I'm sure there are books written on it, but yes, no, I think it's very helpful just to have a bigger context of the role of heralds in society.
And also, I should add, because it's not just heraldry you're talking about, the whole role of the peerage and peerage law as well as the law of arms. And that's how the House of Lords also, that side of things is very important.
Another question.
Adrian, thank you very much for a superb lecture. I'm just curious, the Kings of Arms coronets have a distinctive pattern of acanthus leaves. Do we know reason why it's so different to all the other coronets of the peers' coronets and also royal crowns?
Pass. I don't know whether anybody in the audience, I'm looking around for any inspiration. No, I don't know, it'd be interesting to, the early depictions of heralds, I showed one from the 16th century, their crowns are very much just general sort of crowns. What you'd need to do is to find payment for those crowns, try and narrow it down to specific designs or paintings which are accurate and see how that has evolved over time. But there must be somewhere, probably in the records of the College of Arms, what the design of the new crowns or coronets. I'm never quite sure whether they're crowns or coronets. Tim, is it crowns or coronets that kings wear? Yes, crowns, yes. I'm not sure where the original design came from. Good question, don't know, sorry. I believe it is, and I think it is to reflect the king's. Yes. Well, I think it's to reflect the king's interests in matters green and environment, and so on. But it's to kind of emphasize that particular interest which he has.
Can I just add about the Green Man that Angela Tilby wrote defending the inclusion of the Green Man on this Christian invitation in the Church Times recently. So it's okay.
Thank you.
Is the red Welsh dragon still used?
Is the Welsh dragon still used? Yes, very much so. It's on the flag of Wales, which I think received official sanction, should we say, in the late 1950s. It's also on the badge of Wales, the royal granted by royal assent in, I think, 1953. So the red dragon is still very much used. It's now on coins. For example, the pound coin has the Welsh dragon. One of the pound coins has the Welsh dragon. Interestingly, and I'll try to be brief here, that in when William III and Queen Mary came to the throne, I was going to give the date there, but I need to date of William and Mary, 1680, Andrea, 1680s, sorry, in the late 1680s. He was invited back by the English. He was invited by the English Parliament to come over. He came over. His coronation took place, but the Scots Parliament hadn't yet decided that. Convention Parliament hadn't yet decided that he was King of Scotland. It was actually on the day of his coronation in London that it was agreed that he should become King of Scotland. So until that time, the Welsh dragon was brought out of retirement. He was fired up, she was fired up, and used as a supporter for the arms, the Royal Arms of England. The Welsh dragon was reused again after the Tudor period, very briefly, for the arms, the Royal Arms of William and Mary in the late 1680s. And if you go to the Tower of London, you'll see, is it the Cadenet? Is that how you pronounce it, Mark? Which has those arms engraved. In other words, with the Welsh dragon taking the place of the Scottish unicorn. Because as I say, for a short time, the Welsh dragon had replaced the Scottish unicorn. So yes, it's very much still used. Yes, I wouldn't want to stand here and say the Welsh dragon is not used. Should be in trouble. The men of Harlech would be descending upon me.
I don't think there are any more questions, and I think Adrian's been very generous in answering so many. So I'd like to thank him very much again for a fascinating talk, which has set us up nicely to observe the tabards on the Heralds on Saturday and to take renewed interest in all the heraldic associations. So thank you very much, Adrian.
Pleasure.
And whilst everybody's still here, can I just remind you that our next lunchtime lecture is on Tuesday, the 6th of June. It's on Cambridge College Gardens, a history from medieval and Tudor times, and that'll be given by Dr. Anna Benson. Can I also remind you about the Rituals of Power Through the Centuries evening event, which is happening this Friday, the 5th of May. There's still some late evening places, and you can find out more about it outside, or ask one of the Annabelle or more about it. And so it'll involve music, show and tell activities, lino block printing, and much more. But if you want to find out more about what's on offer here, everything's advertised online on our website, and you can book places, and all our events are free and open to anyone to join. And to find out more about what the Society is doing, do sign up for Salon, our fortnightly e-newsletter. And you can do that through the website, and that will give you more information about events and activities taking place here. So thank you very much.